We've got new contract projections for free agent starting pitchers. Will the Cardinals meet the asking price? Coming up on B-Shafe Daily. What's going on, everybody, and welcome in to this edition of B-Shafe Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you on Wednesday, November 1st, 2023. Hope everyone had a safe Halloween out there last night. We're talking today about some free agent pitchers, which is going to be a huge conversation for St. Louis Cardinals fans this offseason. But the reason we're doing it today is because we got, some really interesting new projections from The Athletic on what some of these free agent pitchers could command in terms of their contract. The article in The Athletic was posted earlier today by Tim Britton and is titled MLB Contract Projection Machine. What could the best free agent pitchers sign for? Definitely recommend this article at The Athletic, but we're going to talk a little bit about it in this episode because, as we know, the Cardinals are looking for free agent starting pitchers and hopefully more than just one. It's an area where the team should expect to spend a good deal of cash this offseason. We think the Cardinals need 3 starting pitchers. That is the official stance of the B-Shafe Daily podcast and the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals Writer YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right there on YouTube. Hit like on this video for more Cardinals content throughout the offseason. But we wanted to get into a little bit of these projections because we know that when there is a conversation about spending money in the St. Louis Cardinals, fans are going to have a lot of different opinions on whether they believe it's actually going to come to fruition. Last offseason, the big topic of conversation was John Mozeliak saying at the end of season press conference, of which there has still not been one this year, but maybe right after the World Series we'll get a drop on that. But nevertheless, last year's press conference, he said, hey, the payroll is going to go up. And that excited a lot of people. And then the offseason happens, and technically the payroll was a little bit higher, but it wasn't demonstrably so. And in fact, the Cardinals had kind of fallen off the pace a little bit relative to their peers in the National League and across Major League Baseball. They were middle of the pack in payroll last year. We saw that did not work to their advantage on the field as the Cardinals went 71 and 91. And so people would look at it going into this offseason and say, well, how do we know that it's going to be different this time when John Mozeliak says, we know we need to go out and get 3 starting pitchers? And then only a few weeks later, we hear him sort of walking back the aggressiveness of those comments by saying, well, we've got some young guys that we're excited about as well. We know we have to improve the depth of our starting pitching, but maybe 3 names was a little bit lofty in terms of the words that he should have been using or felt that he should have been using. Because on the final day of the season, that clip that we played from Valley Sports Midwest when he was talking to Jim Hayes said, well, when I said 3 starters, we were kind of in a spot where we didn't have a lot to show for it in our rotation. And we feel like over the latter stages of the season, things started to look better. We don't really agree with that on this podcast. I think a lot of Cardinals fans don't agree with that. The idea that, well, they saw some good things from the young guys, so the depth is not in as bad of a shape as they had anticipated it would be. No, I think it is still a far cry from where it needs to be for the Cardinals to have a legitimate contending rotation. Some of those young guys are going to help you out throughout the 2024 season. It's inevitable that there will be injuries, but that's the whole purpose of depth. You start out with a rotation that you say, hey, we can put this group up against anybody's, and then when you have some attrition, when you have some injuries, you need to be reliant upon some of the up-and-coming players to fill those spots. But you can't, out of the gate, in my opinion, put one of those guys as your number 5 or maybe multiple guys from that group as your starting rotation, your number 4, your number 5, and then go on to experience the attrition that every team has. That's why when the Cardinals talked about injuries last year and how that was a big reason for their failed season, I just wasn't really buying it because every team has injuries, and you can make the case that up until the Cardinals really started to wave the white flag the final 2 months, they really weren't hampered by all that many injuries. A couple of injuries in the outfield, but they were staggered to where you weren't losing too many guys at once throughout the first 4 months of the season. The rotation, sure, I guess, had some injuries, but really it was just Adam Wainwright for the most part. Everybody else was largely healthy throughout the year, and obviously Wainwright was only unhealthy, only missed the first month of the season. Now, was he healthy when he was pitching? We've since come to find out, no. I think it was a torn labrum. He had injuries he was working through. But other than Waino, you could make the case that starting pitching-wise, the Cardinals were actually rather fortunate with the limited impact that injuries had on the group throughout the bulk of the season. Steven Matz here and there. But there are other teams who just got completely ravaged, right, in their rotation, and you got to figure out a way to pick up the pieces. So for the Cardinals to come into this season and expect to be able to contend, I think you do need 3 major league caliber starting pitchers, and 2 of them at least have got to be in the top half of your rotation. You need a number 1, and you honestly probably need a number 2. Given the way baseball be, you can't rely on Miles Mikolas, I think, as a number 2 in your rotation if you're just plotting it out on paper, because as Ollie Marmol acknowledged when I was talking to him, me and Benjamin Hockman, I think I've shared this on the podcast, but late in the season, might have been the last day of the season, last couple of days of the season, we were talking on the field just about the notion of swing and miss and how if you really look at the FIP and different things for Miles Mikolas, not all that dissimilar to what he had done previously in his career, but the bad luck kind of bit him in the butt this year. And Ollie said, yeah, he is the pitcher that he is. You're only going to be able to rely upon your stuff and the way you work to succeed. You can't become a guy that you're not. And, you know, the defense behind Mikolas, maybe not as crisp this year, bad luck working against him this year, but acknowledging those things. I don't think that's to say that Miles Mikolas can't be an important part of the Cardinals rotation, but I do take that to mean, hey, we've got to have some guys who do profile as more swing and miss heavy pitchers that can complement Mikolas. So you don't have a staff full of guys that are in that same boat where you're reliant upon defense, you're reliant upon luck, 1 through 5 or 2 through 5 in your rotation. It just isn't a way to work and succeed in modern Major League Baseball. So with that in mind, I think the Cardinals have to go out and get a couple of dudes and then a guy who is more than just a veteran depth piece invite to spring training. Maybe we'll use him, maybe we won't. I think you need a bona fide guy that's going to fit in your rotation as the third guy you pick up. And that might be a lofty ask, but it's the one that John Mozeliak threw the gauntlet down on and said he was going to do. He can always go back later and say, well, remember, I took that back. So what? You were right the first time. Ollie Marmol, consistently the final day of the season in his office, when asked, are you on the same page with the front office about what's needed? Yes, 3 starters is what's needed. Well, do you think you're going to get 3 starters? Is Mo going to? That's what's needed. I mean, he was clear as day, and you may think what you think about Ollie Marmol. He was dead right, and you know that he was. Cardinals need 3 starting pitchers. So with that in mind, let's go into this article a little bit from The Athletic and talk about a couple of the names that we think are interesting for the St. Louis Cardinals. Definitely recommend reading this article by Tim Britton. Again, it's MLB contract projection machine as they look at free agent starting pitchers. Worth checking out in The Athletic because he talks all about his methodology and how he comes up with these numbers. But just going to do some general conversation about some of the big names for today's episode of B-Shape Daily. Yoshinobu Yamamoto is at the top of the list in this article, and understandably so, with the dominance that he has experienced in Nippon Professional Baseball over there in Japan. And basically, Tim Britton comes up with it and says, according to his kind of calculations, and the methodology, again, is all there in the article, this is the most prominent pitcher to ever come from Nippon Professional Baseball, just barely better than Masahiro Tanaka when he came over a number of years ago and signed with the Yankees. And based on all the projections that he puts into that, 7 years, $203 million would be the projected salary for Yamamoto. 25 years old, difference-making free agent starting pitcher. Do we think the Cardinals are going to go above $200 million for a guy that has never pitched in North America against major league opponents outside of whatever he did in the World Baseball Classic? Yeah, man, that's going to be difficult to imagine for the way this Cardinals organization has operated in the past as it pertains to big free agent contracts. But I think the Cardinals have put themselves out of the running for contracts that would have proven over time to have been really good investments, instead favoring kind of the aging starting pitcher. And we'll get into guys like Aaron Nola, who I still believe would be a good fit for the Cardinals. And it's more along the lines of what we expect the Cardinals to do just based on their track record. But when you look at a 25-year-old arm, sign him to a little bit longer of a contract. Yes, you have to pay the posting fee, which at times I have been unclear on the posting fee. They've changed it compared to what it used to be. It's basically $5 million because the first 20% of the contract, up to $25 million, is taken at 20%. So that's going to be $5 million posting fee. The next $25 million is taken at 17.5%, and then it's 15% of the remaining total above a $50 million contract, which you know Yamamoto is going to smash that total. But it's not a 25% total posting fee of the total contract. It's more like a little bit under 20%. It's going to be, right around that probably 16, 17% number because it's a tiered system. So let's just say in that range between 16, 17%. I'm not going to do the actual math, but you could do it and very easily figure it out. But that's going to mean around a $30 million, $32 million posting fee if he signed this $200 million contract. A 25-year-old pitcher does not often, if ever, come available in free agency of the caliber that Yamamoto is. And so for my money, which I have to understand and acknowledge that Bill DeWitt's money is not my money, but if it were my money, I would be looking at this and saying, hey, this is a guy just entering the prime of his career, theoretically, and you could get a lot of great years out of him. It's kind of like when Bryce Harper, on the position player side, was a free agent at 26 years old or 27 years old, whatever it was a number of years ago, and the Phillies signed him to that big, long contract. They didn't care that it was going to be so lengthy because he was so young. And yeah, maybe by the time he gets into his late 30s, approaches 40 years old, the Phillies are going, yeah, the latter years of this deal kind of stings. But because it was so many years, I think he got like a 13-year contract. Because it was so many, that decreases the average annual value of the contract and makes it more palatable on a yearly basis for the years that he's not performing. Now, that's a position player. You're never going to sign a pitcher to that, a 13-year contract. We know that over the course of a lengthy contract, a pitcher is probably going to miss a year due to Tommy John. That's just the nature of the beast when it comes to pitching. But you kind of have to pay the premium for pitching because as we have seen, as we saw this Cardinals season, you have to have it to succeed. And you have to have it in quantity and in quality in terms of the guys in your starting rotation. So Yamamoto, a guy who has been dominant already and projects to be just entering the prime of his career from an age perspective, yes, you're going to be paying, in that $25 to $30 million range on an annual basis. And if you factor in the posting fee, yes, it'll come out to, according to these projections, more than $30 million per year, more like pushing $35 million per year, all told. That's a significant amount. But historically, the Cardinals' strategy, which they have acknowledged, at least in terms of 2023, needing to change the strategy and not continue with the status quo of the way that they have approached the pitching market, I would even prefer to see them extend that thought process further back and say the way that you have approached free agent starting pitching when you've gone for it hasn't necessarily been a beneficial one. Think all the way back to contracts like Mike Leake when they say, okay, we do want to sign a starting pitcher. We know that we've got to do it, but we're gonna shop on a lower shelf. We're going to buy into a lower tier because if it goes badly, it's not going to burn us as bad, which is true. It's not going to be catastrophic for the Mike Leake deal to go wrong. It wouldn't be catastrophic if the Steven Matz deal went kaput, right? Like these deals, even the extension for Miles Mikolas, it's a shorter deal, not as much money in terms of comparing it to like the star players on the free agent market, even though it is a hefty salary for Mikolas the next couple of years. Like those deals going south on you don't cripple a franchise and their ability to kind of field a competitive roster in theory. But the Cardinals have towed that line for so long that it feels like they are missing out on the potential and the value of, hey, we're going to pay market price for a superstar and get one and do well with it. When you don't end up paying in that tier, in terms of these free agents, you either have to get incredibly lucky or be drafting really high, which the Cardinals historically have not done, to be able to tap into that level of talent, and then you have to develop that talent. And for the Cardinals, it's just been a challenge to be able to develop that high-end talent. They've drafted plenty of pitchers. Those guys just have not turned into the star starting pitchers, at least not for this organization. You can save the Zach Gallen and the Sandy Alcantara talk for another day. I know, I understand it, but they haven't been able to benefit from those guys in their organization for any number of reasons. You could do a 5-hour podcast debating them, right? But until you're ready to open yourself up to the notion of a contract that, if it goes south, can hurt you and can be a tremendous financial burden, you're probably not going to be able to tap into, at least in free agency, that upper echelon of talent. And for me, it would make sense to go ahead and take that plunge on a 25-year-old starting pitcher rather than a 31-year-old. Because if we go down the list a little bit further, you can look at the Aaron Nola projection. He's the next starting pitcher on this list for the Athletic. He's 31 years old. He's, a really talented pitcher. He's got the obvious tools. His numbers have not been as good the last couple of years, but we saw him perk back up in the postseason. The projection here, 6 years and $180 million for Aaron Nola. So you're talking $30 million a year still, but over a slightly lesser length of time because of the age as the primary reason for that. But he's 31 years old. A 6-year contract takes him to age 37. The decline is, although he kind of projects as the workhorse type of guy that can still get deeper into his career, age 36, continue to perform for you probably, it doesn't feel like there's any realm in which you could project Aaron Nola at age 36 to be as good relative to what he is now compared to Yamamoto at age 32. in the final year of his contract, right? Like 4 years younger, still in the prime of his career, still maybe ready to sign another multi-year contract if you're Yoshi Yamamoto at that point. But the Cardinals tend to go for the guys who are already over 30 because they say, well, it's gonna cost us less. There won't be this expectation that we have to go more years. But if a 25-year-old signing a 7-year, even if it's like an 8-year deal for Yamamoto versus a 6-year deal for a 31-year-old, it's obvious to me where the money should be devoted if you had to choose between the two. The Cardinals really don't have to choose between the two because I would continue to beat the drum for, hey, if you really want to make a splash, if these contract projections end up being accurate, okay, you're going to spend $230 million on Yamamoto. $30 million of that or so is the upfront fee for the posting fee. And then after that, it's going to be around $30 million a year, a little bit less for 7 years. All right, so let's just put that number at about 30 with the understanding that you'll have to pay an upfront cost as well in terms of the posting fee. Add Aaron Nola to that. 6 years, 180. That's another 30 every year on your salary, on your payroll. We understand it. It's a lot. Now that's $60 million. Okay. Tyler Glasnow. He's a trade target that I think would be an obvious fit for the Cardinals, particularly because of the fact that he's not signed long-term. And I think inevitably the Cardinals are going to need to develop some pitching. It doesn't work to pay your pitchers every year, all 5 of them, and just find them in free agency. That's not a long-term sustainable model. So I would look at Tyler Glasnow, who's going to be owed like $25 million by the Tampa Bay Rays, and that's a oxymoron of a sentence if I've ever heard one. And I would say, all right, you guys don't want to pay him. We could certainly use him. What's the young talent that it takes to get him with the understanding that we're taking this contract off your books, right? You want to get some value for this player, but you don't want to necessarily pay him. He's got an injury history, so there's a level of risk associated with that. What's it going to take? I saw I don't know if this was Viva Alberto's. I didn't look too closely into it, but it flashed across my Twitter timeline. Somebody projecting like, okay, Alec Burleson for Glasnow, and I think Jason Adam was maybe the other Tampa Bay pitcher that they said should come over in that trade. And I think he's coming off of an injury for the Tampa Bay Rays. And as much as I think that might be a little bit lofty to expect you could get 2 pitchers for Alec Burleson does feel like the type of hitter that the Tampa Bay Rays would be in on, first of all, because you can see the skills there. You can see the platoon advantages of having a guy like that. He could play a couple of different positions defensively, has a bunch of team control. Like, that's the main standout point here is the Rays could look at that and say, man, we're shedding a bunch of salary, getting a guy with team control. My end thought, and Burleson's a name that I thought of in the context of Tyler Glasnow previously. Some people have wondered about Tommy Edman. That would be an overpay to me, to pay Tommy Edman because he's a proven major league caliber player that's versatile, flexible. He's a perfect Tampa Bay Rays guy. I don't think the Cardinals could trade multiple years of Tommy Edman in ARB for a $25 million 1 year of Tyler Glasnow, which could end before spring training even starts. With his injury history, it's possible that you don't ever reap the benefits of that. So the Cardinals have to do a cost-benefit analysis on this thing, but they could look at it and say, Alec Burleson, we see the talent there. The Rays are probably going to see it as well, and as much as it would be just disgusting to get fleeced by the Rays again and see a player that we do believe in St. Louis, the front office believes in him, see a player like that sent away and maybe not get to reap the benefit of it, and even if you do, it's for 6 months, and then Glasnow is a free agent. Either that or you got to sign him to an extension, which could burn you even further if we're talking about being concerned about injury history. But if you're talking about 2024 being a year that you want to prioritize, there could be worse ways to allocate Alec Burleson as a resource. If you're just talking about asset management, is Alec Burleson going to get a bunch of playing time next year for the Cardinals? Is that their best way to win in 2024? I'm not saying it's not, but I also am saying with Nootbaar, with Jordan Walker, with Brendan Donovan around, unless they're trading somebody like Nolan Gorman, there's not necessarily an obvious spot to play Burleson every day when everybody's healthy. If Paul Goldschmidt has a devastating injury in spring, then you say, okay, Burleson's your first baseman. Let's ride and see if we can extract that value from him that the Cardinals and Ollie Marmol and everybody that has kind of backed Alec Burleson believes is in there as an offensive talent. But otherwise, is there an everyday obvious fit with the kind of log jam you have in the corner outfield spots, the log jam that you expect to have at DH when fully healthy? Maybe not. So that could be an avenue that I would say would make sense. I just don't know how the Cardinals internally would feel about 5 years of team control for 1 year of an injury-riddled, a pitcher with injury history that you also have to pay $25 million. So now we're up to like $85 million added immediately to the Cardinals payroll in 2024. That is an exorbitant number. I'm not going to deny it. I don't have time right now to dig into the perfect payroll math of where that would put them. Probably around $200 million, I think. Maybe more, maybe less. I'm not even going to cite where I'm looking at right now because I know that there are some resources better than others, and it's just a rough estimate, so I don't really care about the exact numbers right now. It's November. We've got a long way to go. It would probably put the Cardinals over $200 million payroll, and I know that that's something that, you know, they've not touched, they've not done. I think they were like 160 some odd this year. Again, don't get caught up in the exact figures. We're just trying to demonstrate here for the sense of, like, would that be so far and above what they could conceivably do? I don't think so. I think they could do it, especially if it was the understanding of, like, it's going to be 1 year because we're trying to win and turn things around in 2024, and a rotation of Yamamoto, Aaron Nola, Miles Michaelis, Tyler Glasnow, Steven Matz could absolutely contend. That would be a top 5 unit in the National League. Would it not be? It would have to be. Top 10 in Major League Baseball? I would think so when fully healthy. So that's my point of, could you do that for 1 year? Could you stomach it for 1 year? And then the following year, 2025, the understanding that Tyler Glasnow was a mercenary. He was a 1 year guy, and the payroll's going to take a little bit of a breather at that point when you subtract his $25 million. And then you settle into like the 180, 190 range, whatever the Cardinals realistically believe it should be. They'll have different numbers probably in mind than fans would have. But you could do that for a year because you could say, hey, that would immediately vault us back onto the map in terms of starting pitching. And we wouldn't really lose anything from the lineup if Burleson was the main piece. And again, I think you'd have to add in another young pitcher. But I also don't think the Cardinals would be willing necessarily to do that. Like the Rays would say, hey, we got to get some pitching back if we're giving up a stud pitcher like this. The Cardinals would say, look, you're getting 5 years of team control of somebody. So that's like what the dance would be, I would have to imagine. And I'm not pretending like I know exactly how such negotiations would go or if either team would even be interested in this type of swap. I'm sure that the Rays would say, hey, Tommy Edman would be really interesting. If I'm the Cardinals, I just don't think that makes sense for 1 year of a really good pitcher who could potentially get hurt, though. You have to keep that in mind with Tyler Glasnow. But that would be the type of move that I would say, hey, that vaults you in. Now, are the Cardinals going to sign Yamamoto and Aaron Nola? Almost definitely not. It's just we can believe and we can have faith that, hey, they know they've got to take this seriously and be more aggressive in spending than they ever have been. But I think they're going to shop still on a little bit lower of a tier, at least for one of the two arms they pick up. Like if they get Nola or Yamamoto, and I would say Nola would be much more likely, even though you do lose a second-round pick with that. Something to keep in mind there. Yamamoto, you might have to pay $30-something million in a posting fee, but you get to keep your second-round pick. What's the surplus value of that? The Cardinals going to have to make those decisions. They did lose their second-rounder last year, along with the allocated bonus money when it comes to the Wilson Contreras free agent signing. So would they want to do that 2 years in a row? They may not have a choice. Another guy that it would apply to, Sonny Gray. And the projection on here of Sonny Gray, 3 years, $72 million, I feel like is just prime Cardinals territory. Because, again, they like those deals that when they go wrong, they don't go catastrophically wrong because you're not on the hook for $200 million. 72 is a much more acceptable total. But on the average annual value, they'd be paying Sonny Gray $24 million. He's 34 years old. So you're talking about, just having faith that Gray's game continues to age gracefully. To me, that's riskier in a lot of ways to say, yeah, I'm going to pay a 36-year-old $24 million and it's hopefully going to pan out. You could see him drop off the table very, very soon, or you get lucky and it goes your way for a couple of years, and then maybe year 3 is a little bit of a decline, but he's still serviceable. That's the Cardinals' MO. That would be what makes sense. I think Sonny Gray is going to end up a Cardinal if I had to guess. I'd be almost surprised if he didn't, just because it fits what they've historically done to a T so much. Whether that's the right way to spend the money or not, I guess time is going to tell, but it certainly fits more into their modus operandi than paying a 9-figure contract and a hefty 9-figure contract for some of the other guys. So if their main get is Sonny Gray and then they go down a little bit lower and they add to the bullpen aggressively, other guys on this list, Charlie Morton, Clayton Kershaw, could I see Lucas Giolito on kind of a pillow deal bounce back sort of thing? The projection here is 4 years, $70 million. There's always the possibility that Giolito takes a 1-year deal in order to kind of rebuild his trade value, or I should say free agent value. Instead of going 4 years, $70 million, maybe he goes 1 year, $20 million or $22 million and says, I can get a $100 million contract if I pitch well for 1 year because I'm not that old. Right now, Lucas Giolito, age 29. Jack Flaherty, kind of in that same caliber at age 28. Projection here is 3 years, $45 million. So whatever you might think of Jack Flaherty. Then you can go down to a Michael Wacha, and there's a Shota Imanaga, the other Japanese pitcher that we mentioned, who I think previously when I talked about Imanaga, I was maybe pumping him up a little bit more and not recognizing that the transition from NPB to MLB would maybe hit him a little bit harder. 4 years, $52 million, the projection here on Imanaga, and I think that would be very interesting. With the posting fee only around $60 million, I think that would be the kind of shot that I would like to take as the Cardinals if I'm getting that guy as the third best pitcher or even the second best pitcher. Maybe I go Imanaga, Gray, and trade for Glasnow still. That is still a pretty aggressive offseason. It's definitely not to the heights of the things that we were saying a moment ago with Yamamoto and Aaron Nola and Glasnow. That to me would be, hey, we're pushing all the chips in and we're gonna get some wins this year and make it happen in 2024. More realistically, could I see Imanaga, Gray, and then a trade or a Michael Wacha level free agent signing, Giolito? Yeah, I think that would be a way the Cardinals could get three guys, and maybe that would be a better usage of their funding as well. I think there's a lot of opinions that could be out there. Let me know your opinions, Cardinals fans, by chiming in to the YouTube comment section below. Because I think it's so interesting, like even the scenario that we just described might be far more aggressive than the Cardinals end up going. And then we kind of delve into the territory of, is this actually different that we're seeing from the Cardinals in terms of what they do this offseason? A lot of people in the replies for me on Twitter have been pretty skeptical, I would say. Cardinals fans that say, I just don't think they can fix it all in one offseason, and maybe they can just get back to, close to equilibrium, maybe be a 500 team, maybe they can add at the trade deadline. Like some very interesting comments that I don't know if that's reflective of the entire fan base, but it's kind of crazy to me that you can have the Cardinals front office and you can have the manager and you can have basically everybody associated in a position of power with the team saying, we need to be aggressive this offseason. We need to do things differently than we've done before because we are going to be competitive for a championship in 2024. That's the expectation. That's what needs to happen. That's what we're going to do. Like, they've been consistent in saying those things. Maybe the route that gets them there, people might disagree on how exactly that's going to go. And when you say aggressive, how aggressive do you actually mean? And like over the course of time, we'll find out exactly what that looks like. But I've been surprised by seeing some of the replies on Twitter from Cardinals fans that are like, well, there's just too much of a gap to make up, and I just don't think they're going to be able to do it all in one off season. And it's like, but that's what they said needs to happen, and they're the team. Like, they're the ones that if anybody had a reason to kind of water it down a little bit and put less pressure on themselves, it would be the people in charge, but they're not really saying those things. So to me, it's kind of crazy that I'm seeing that sentiment a little bit from Cardinals fans. Like, even if you don't think it's possible, which I don't know why you'd say that, because I do think they have a blueprint, a foundation in place offensively to be successful. I know you can point to, well, they were 19th in runs scored or middle of the pack in all these statistics offensively, and that's true. They did basically mail it in completely at the end and run out a lot of guys offensively that are not going to be mainstays when you get to next season. Lots of guys going on the IL for even a minor injury. If they had something small at that point, it was still going to be pretty much curtains for their season. So I think if you look at the blueprint and the foundation of what they will have offensively, add a little bit to it, flesh it out a little more. Yes, I agree with that, but I think it can be pretty good. Pitching is really what they need, and they're saying, hey, we know we have to spend and we have to acquire starting pitchers, whether the number ends up being 3 or 2. That kind of remains to be seen. I think it has to be 3, but it'll be interesting to see if we do get a press conference now that the World Series is over, what we end up hearing from John Mozeliak. Will it sound like what he said in August or end of September, early October, or will we get a completely different answer a month later as to how aggressive they'll be? Signing 3 free agent starters, probably difficult, but if you trade for 1, sign 2, I think certainly plausible. And then the notion of, all right, technically they could just sign somebody that isn't a name we've mentioned so far. Like on this Athletic article that we've been running through, go down even further on the list. Tyler Mahle, 2 years, $20 million is the projection. Frankie Montas, evidently a free agent, 1 year, $13 million. Seth Lugo, 2 years, $26. Like you could go down the list, and there's a number of names that, sure, they're technically free agent starters. You could sign somebody, Kenta Maeda, 1 year, $10 million. These are the projections on here. Andrew Heaney, pitched in the World Series, 1 year, $12 million. Like that could be, and more likely will be, the route they go Michael Lorenzen, 1 year, $11 million. He would be kind of interesting in this tier. But like that's probably the route they go for the fifth starter, right? Get somebody on a 1 year deal, and instead of trading assets for Tyler Glasnow, get somebody that you're going to pay half that $25 million and just sign him as a free agent and hope it pans out. The upside for Glasnow is obviously higher. I am in favor of a Glasnow trade, even with the risk and the fact that he hasn't really pitched a full season. I still say go for it because the upside is there. But I also understand the Cardinals are going to be hesitant to be reckless with their assets, whether that's financial or in terms of player talent that it would cost to acquire somebody via trade. But in reality, like, we can have the ultimate and talk about Yamamoto and Nola and trading for Glasnow, and then you can go a step down and say, well, what if they still trade for Glasnow, which may be hard to pull off, but let's just say for the sake of argument that they do that, and they sign Sonny Gray because it's going to be a shorter-term contract, and they feel like it can contain similar upside over the next 2-3 years as an Aaron Nola deal would, and you don't have to pay him on the back half of that deal because the guy's a couple few years older, probably would expect a shorter contract. So that pans out, and then you sign somebody in this tier where it's, it's Michael Wacha, it's Andrew Heaney, it's Kyle Gibson. I mean, just a veteran pitcher of various degrees of expectations, and that's your number 5. That feels more realistic as to what the Cardinals could do. But the question that I saw Kyle Reese ask today on Twitter, which I think is a great question, and it's kind of the theme of the offseason, like, what's the least the Cardinals could do to get you hyped up in terms of adding 2 or 3 starting pitchers? Like, what's the lowest they could go where they do it so they follow through on what they said they do, but it's still enough to have you go, hey, I think this is going to be enough to get the job done, versus, okay, yeah, technically you got 3 starting pitchers, but when I look at the names that you got, and I'm not going to just like name a list of what that would look like off the cuff and diminish those guys because very well some of them could be Cardinals. But I think that's kind of the point here is, could they go a route where technically they do add 3 outside starters, but it's very underwhelming and you look at it as, did the Cardinals actually improve? That, I think, is going to be the most interesting question. I have been bullish on the notion that they know what it takes and what they'll be able to accomplish. Maybe that is, there's no reason for that. I don't know. Maybe there's no reason for that optimism. I tend to believe that they understand what's at stake here and are going to be willing to do what's necessary to fix it. Whether that ends up happening is going to be so fascinating to track this offseason, because every move that is made or isn't made, if a player signs with another team, that'll be under the microscope. If the Cardinals do make a move, a trade, a signing, that'll be under the microscope as we kind of put the puzzle pieces together of the grand plan that we'll see coming together before our eyes over the next 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, these 6 to 8 weeks are going to be among the most important in the Cardinals franchise in a decade, I dare say. Like, there's a lot that's going to happen in a short period of time, and it's not going to be the usual Cardinals way of waiting to see the market develop. I don't think they're going to be able to do that, especially if they want to get involved in the Japanese market as these pitchers are posted in the coming days. Those guys could sign relatively quickly. I think that's a possibility. Free agency starts in 5 days. Like that, it's going to ramp up quickly. And where are the Cardinals going to be in all of that? Because if they sit around and wait and say, let's see the market develop, they may not have their pick of the options that are going to be game changers for them, that are going to be difference makers to the extent that they'll be able to turn a 71-win season into a playoff appearance and hopefully a deep playoff run. But for the Cardinals fans that say it can't be turned around in one offseason, I present to you your world champion Texas Rangers, who went 68-94 last season. That was their record a year ago. And tonight, they were crowned world champions. So it can be done. It is absolutely a possibility. Yes, it's going to take some spending, though. And will the Cardinals be willing to go to the lengths necessary to make that happen? We'll see. And I'm going to enjoy finding out with the rest of you guys. So thank you guys so much for listening, though. I am going to wrap things up here for this edition of B-Shafe Daily. More to come. It's all going to be starting pitcher based, I feel. Well, I mean, there will be trades to be discussed, certainly bullpen options that we can get into. But man, the Cardinals rotation is going to look vastly different in a matter of months, and I think that has a chance to make or break what they do in 2024. Let me know all your Cardinals thoughts. We are finally ready to truly ramp things up as the World Series has concluded with the Rangers being crowned as champions. I had a little bit of a delay in the middle of recording this episode, so if I said at the beginning that the World Series wasn't over. Well, it is now as of me doing this last little bit of the recording for this episode. So that means it's full steam ahead. Talking Cardinals offseason. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to Be Schaeffer Daily as well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Be Schaeffer Daily and the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals Writer YouTube channel. Peace.